Picture this, June 1944, France. British tank crews are pushing their machines to the limit, racing through the fields of Normandy so fast that the Germans simply can't get them in their sights. Why? Because under the hood beats the heart of a Spitfire fighter. Yes, you heard that right. This is the story of how a bunch of crazy engineers took the aircraft engine from Britain's fastest plane, crammed it into a steel box, and got 30 tons of pure adrenaline. It all started because British tanks were slow. Funny, but at the start of the war, they crawled across the battlefield at walking pace. Their engines dated back to the First World War, 340 horsepower, barely able to drag 30 tons. Then an engineer at Rolls-Royce named Robotham looked at the aero engine Merlin, the very one that powered British aces, and thought, what if? It was madness. Aero engines are too complex, too expensive. They need aviation fuel and constant pampering. But he simply removed the supercharger from the Merlin. The bit needed for altitude cut off the propeller reduction gear, lowered the compression ratio so the engine could run on the same fuel used by tank units, and got 600 horsepower, twice as much as the old tanks had. The first prototype was bolted into an old Crusader for a test. They hit the gas, and the tank shot off so fast that the engineers with their stopwatches couldn't even press the button. The driver flew into a turn, knocked down a telegraph pole like a matchstick, and was grinning like a kid. That was 1941, the year the Meteor engine was born, and British tanks were never slow again. When the Cromwell finally went into production in 1943 and first saw combat in Normandy in 44, it was already a beast. A 28-ton tank that could hit 64 kilometers an hour. By comparison, the Tiger, at 57 tons, could barely manage 40. This wasn't just a tank, it was a sprinter. A crew of 5, armor up to 76 millimeters, a 75 millimeter gun. Taking on Tigers and Panthers head-on was pointless. They were heavier, thicker-skinned, and hit harder at range. But the British didn't go head-on. They used the Cromwell like a scalpel, flanking at top speed, hitting from the side or rear, and the German tanks couldn't even traverse their turrets in time. The Germans simply couldn't draw a bead on them, too fast. What the tank crew said Frank Russell, gunner on a Cromwell in the 1st Royal Tank Regiment, recalled, "I liked the Cromwell. It had the speed when it was needed, 64 kilometers an hour in good conditions, whereas the Sherman only had 45. On top of that, we had an extremely reliable Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. When you needed to punch through a breach in the enemy line, that speed was priceless." But here's what he said about the cramped interior. Was it uncomfortable? Fantastically uncomfortable. My seat was about the size of a small plate. Of course, you got bounced around, but you soon learned the places to grab hold of so you didn't bruise yourself. The Achilles heel, armor protection, was the Achilles heel. The armor plates were mounted with almost no slope. The field manuals put it bluntly, the armor was not sufficient. A hit to the hull almost always meant losing the vehicle. Veterans remembered the Cromwell couldn't stand up to a German Tiger. One Tiger could be enough to halt an entire British advance. One of the most famous episodes happened near Villers-Bocage, where a Tiger commanded by Michael Whitman punched straight through a Cromwell's turret with a single shot. Lieutenant Cloudsley Thompson later recounted, "I felt a burning pain in my legs and realized I was wounded again. Flames shot up over the turret. I yelled, 'Everybody out.' By sheer luck, none of his crew were killed that day. but it showed just how fragile this machine could be against heavy German armor. Technical gremlins. There were also purely mechanical problems. The thin belly made the tank extremely vulnerable to mines, and in hot weather, the rubber pads on the road wheels had a nasty habit of peeling off, causing breakdowns on the march. Survival tactics. Knowing how vulnerable they were in a frontal fight, Cromwell crews developed their own tactics. In the French bocage, dense hedgerow country, this was especially critical, and commanders constantly had to look for flanking routes and tactical tricks. They didn't trade shots with the German heavyweights. They used speed to get around the flank and punch into the side or rear. After the war, but the really cool part of the Cromwell story is what came after. It fought in Korea, was sold to Greece, Israel, and Finland. In Britain, it stayed in service until 1955, and its upgrade, the Comet, became one of the best British tanks of the Second World War. The verdict. When the Minister of Supply, Sir Andrew Ray Duncan, later reflected on the program, he said that the arrival of the Meteor was a turning point in the history of British tank design. Because the Cromwell proved one thing: sometimes victory isn't about being stronger, it's about being faster. And an engine from a fighter plane roaring across the battlefield like a real aircraft. That was the ace up their sleeve that the Germans never managed to counter.
Friends, if you're interested in military history, tanks, and the events of World War II, be sure to check out the links in the channel header. There you'll find popular military games such as War Thunder and Enlisted, as well as highly detailed and realistic tank models and other military vehicles. Every click, registration, or purchase helps support the channel, fund new videos, and contribute to historical research. Thank you for your support.